Turkestan Islamic Party in Afghanistan now. The Chinese government is very concerned about Afghanistan becoming a base, a safe haven for these guys to launch attacks potentially in China, and have asked the Taliban to ensure that that doesn't happen. And if you remember, though, China has taken at home very hardline measures against Uyghurs in Xinjiang in the name of preventing terrorism. There's this network of extrajudicial detention camps. Hundreds of thousands, if not a million or more, are reported to be detained over the past 4 or 5 years. The U.S. calls it genocide.
What does this latest attack tell us about the state of affairs, everyday life in Afghanistan?
Yeah, just the other day, a Taliban spokesman was quoted in Afghan media as saying that ISIS is more of an annoyance than a real threat, but it does seem to be a real problem for the Taliban, and it's not the only one they face. Taliban, in a nutshell, is struggling to shift gears from being an insurgency to governing this country of close to 40 million people. Meanwhile, the Afghan economy is just collapsing. Trade has dropped sharply. Aid is starting to trickle back in, but it's not enough. There's a cash shortage. Salaries aren't getting paid. Most families in Afghanistan cannot put enough food on the table on a day-to-day basis. And it's just going to get worse when winter hits.
NPR's John Rowich, thanks so much.
Thank you.
The salmon runs in the Yukon River in Alaska this year were bleak. King salmon has been on the decline there for many years, but this year, chum salmon, which many rural communities depend on for food and income, have been counted at numbers too low to harvest. Opinions vary on causes, but many researchers agree that climate change plays a role. Serena Fitka, Executive Director of the Yukon River Drainage Fisheries Association, joins us from her home in Valdez, Alaska. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I gather you grew up in the village of St. Mary's on the Yukon River. Tell us, please, what things look like there this year.
Well, I brought my kids out, my family out this summer, and we go there every summer to subsistence fish with my family. And it was very dismal. We usually stay out there for about 6 weeks. I've traveled to Marshall from St. Mary's, and the river was barren. There's no boats.
And let's understand this very well in very blunt terms. This is a food shortage for many families, isn't it?
Yes, it is, because salmon's a very large and important staple in all the communities' lives. Every community on the Yukon, we have 42 communities on the Yukon River from the coast to the border. And that's not talking about the First Nations in Canada that also depend on the salmon runs. They were not able to harvest any salmon this year. It's the first time in history no one was able to put their nets in the Yukon River. And so many went without filling their freezers and smoking, drying, cutting their fish for the winter. And we did receive donations from Bristol Bay. The state of Alaska also provided donations to the communities on the Yukon River. However, it does not replace the traditional lifestyle and the traditional preparation that everyone does on the Yukon River.
And help us understand, Ms. Fitka, the salmon is a food source, but it's also a cultural resource in the area, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's very important. It's our lifestyle. It's our identity as Native people to work with what we're given and to prepare our foods that are given to us from the river. I'm Yupik, and the Yupik people depend on fish just like people depend on beef from the store. And you go further up the Yukon River, there's other native cultures that are very similar in how they catch and process their fish, and have the Athabascan, the Gwich'in also practice harvesting their fish. So it's their lifestyle, and it's very hard to not be able to practice our fish culture.
Yeah. How are people eating this year? What are we going to do?
So the people on the Yukon River are hunting more. We've encouraged the people to stock up on moose. and caribou and larger game. We've also asked them to harvest non-salmon species.
Ms. Pkwy, are you concerned that salmon scarcity is going to get worse in the future as the climate does?
It is of great concern, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. We don't know how severe or how impactful the climate is going to change our ways. You know, we talk about warming temperatures in the river, and when I was in St. Mary's a few years ago, it was hot, and not only the air temperature, but the water temperature. Fishermen were stating that on the main stem, the temperatures were 70 degrees, and that is beyond crazy. All I could think of was the fish. And that summer, people found fish belly up floating down the Anderson River, which is a tributary. There's been reports of fish belly up in the Pkwy River and other tributaries along the Yukon. And that, to me, is very concerning and very scary for not only the fishermen, but our next generations.
Ms. Pkwy, what can be done? What kind of help do you think the communities could use?
Well, our YARDFA has a very successful program that we run, and it's in-season salmon management teleconferences. And they bring fishermen and management together. And the community members and the fishermen are able to report out what's going on in their communities, how their subsistence runs are. And then management is also there to listen to all of those concerns and to also answering questions that fishermen may have. These last few years, we've been hearing a lot of questions about what's going on and what's happening to our fish. So I think more research needs to be done, not only in the ocean, but in the spawning grounds of our salmon. We're talking about climate change, and we're talking about high temperatures in the water, and those spawning areas are crucial for our salmon.
Serena Pkwy is Executive Director of the Yukon River Drainage Fisheries Association. Thank you so much for speaking with us.
You're welcome.
And now to the tune of B.J. Lederman's theme music, it's time for sports. It's the most wonderful time of the year. Baseball playoffs, the Boston Red Sox run up the score, and the Tampa Bay Rays' Logan Webb of the Giants shuts the Dodgers' door. The deeply unscrupulous Houston Astros are just getting away from defeating the righteous Chicago White Sox, and meanwhile, Candace Parker of the Chicago Sky headed to the playoffs. Surprisingly, and an important Wall Street Journal report on a racist email remarks from NFL coach John Gruden. Meadowlark Media's Howard Bryan joins us. Thanks for being with us, Howard.
Hi, Scott. That was quite a rundown.
Yeah, I know. What do we left to talk about?
Could we please once and for all? I mean, I know they're going to pay forever for what they did, but the Houston Astros, they have Dusty Baker. Let's root for
I love
Dusty
Dusty Baker, who was once the Cubs manager, once the Giants
guy,
manager.
Dusty Baker.
Yeah, I know he's a Chicago guy. Well, let's just say that sometimes the teams don't deserve their managers, but
that is true. But Dusty Baker is a game away from going to the American League Championship Series and maybe going to the World Series. The one thing that he's never done in a lifetime of baseball and 50 years of baseball is win the World Series as a manager.
And I'd be so happy about that, I'd bang the top of a garbage can lid just to let him know how happy I am. Logan Webb threw quite a game, didn't he, to beat the Dodgers?
He did, and this is what we've been waiting for. Everybody wanted to see the two best teams in baseball, 107 wins, super surprise San Francisco up against the defending world champion Los Angeles Dodgers. These two teams have been playing each other since 1884. and this is the first time that they faced each other in the modern World Series. They actually did, Scott, as you remember, they played in the 1889 World Series where the Giants beat the Brooklyn Bridegrooms in that great best of 11 series back in 1889. But after that, this was the first time, and the Giants were great last night. The Giants were great. The Dodgers were terrible. The Dodgers, they swung at everything, and the energy was phenomenal, and we'll see what Game 2 holds. But this is the battle. They have been the best team all season, and the Giants showed it again last night.
Will the Red Sox regret 14-6? Will they want some of those runs back? Tampa's a pretty good team.
Well, they may. Tampa was great all season as well, and they controlled the entire American League East, and it looked like they controlled this one. Got a grand slam early on. They were up 5-2, and then suddenly the Red Sox poured it on. So suddenly there we have a series.
Yeah. Quickly, Chicago Sky, Candace Parker. How did they do it?
Well, that's an amazing question. We got a 5-6 series in the WA finals. You get WNBA finals. You've got the two best teams who are supposed to be Connecticut and Las Vegas playing against each other, and that didn't happen. And so, Chicago is 16-16 on the season, and you've got the two Cinderellas, but you also have Candace Parker and you've got Diana Taurasi, two of the best to ever do it, and they're gonna play for a championship. And Phoenix, was 3-0 against them this season. Last time they played was a blowout, but you never know. This is best of 5, and it's for all the marbles. Who knows what's going to happen? Good series.
And that Wall Street Journal report, John Gruden sent an email with racist language about the head of the NFL Players Association in 2011. Anything more than a slap on the wrist?
Well, they should get much more than that. But once again, when we talk about systems, and systems are created by people, and I think more than anything else, this sort of showed a lot of the attitudes in the NFL. So when you see these things happen, don't be surprised as to why the things are the way they are in terms of coaching, in terms of hiring and development, and all of these things. This is the underbelly behind the shiny face of the NFL.
Meadowlark Media's Howard Bryant. Talk to you soon. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
You're listening to Weekend Edition from NPR News. Former President Donald Trump holds a rally at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines tonight. It is common for aspiring candidates to come to the early nominating state this far ahead of an election. But as Iowa Public Radio's Clay Masters reports, Trump's visit is new territory.
There always seems to be someone testing the presidential waters here in Iowa. Over the summer, South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem and former Vice President Mike Pence headlined an event for a prominent evangelical Christian group. Senator Tom Cotton went viral doing push-ups at a fundraiser with his Iowa colleague Chuck Grassley.
16, 17, 18, 19.
Coming here this early is about meeting voters and laying the groundwork for a potential campaign. But what's happening tonight is unprecedented. A former president who just lost his re-election is holding a large rally and teasing another run. The latest Iowa poll published in the Des Moines Register says Trump is more popular in the state after leaving office. Pollster Jan Selzer says Trump remains very popular with Republicans and has made gains with independents.
From March, it was 45-53, so a majority of independents saying they had an unfavorable opinion of former President Trump. In this poll, it was 48-49. So he's evened out the edge that was there as a problem with independent voters in Iowa.
The former president boasted about those numbers in an email to supporters this week. His political action committee also hired a couple of Iowa advisors recently. Kedron Bardwell is a political science professor at Simpson College. He says Trump has mostly frozen the field for Republicans.
It doesn't mean that they're not testing the waters, but I don't think people want to go through the amount of work it would take to build the infrastructure and get, the donations lined up, ready to go, if they know that in a few months he's just going to drop his hat in the ring anyway.
Trump's trip to Iowa brings up another thing that's unprecedented: the false claims he's pushing about the 2020 election being stolen. There's no evidence of widespread voter fraud, but Iowans are asking about it at town halls, like at this one last month for Senator Grassley in rural western Iowa.
I see 4 hands up, and I'm going to forget who those are, but you keep raising them.
A man in the back of this crowded room tells Grassley he doesn't trust the outcome of the election.
But I feel in my heart that there was a lot of cheating going on. I mean a lot. If Biden won, I'm okay with it. If Trump won and Biden's in there, I am not okay.
Grassley didn't directly correct the claim. Instead, he defended Iowa's elections and criticized Democratic voting legislation. Kedron Bardwell at Simpson College says misinformation has taken hold in the GOP.
You can't put the genie back in the bottle in terms of once this accusation is unleashed and once it's believed by a large percentage of the Republican base, there's kind of no going back at that point, mainly because kind of the psychological dynamics of misinformation are such that at that point, people will just find and then rationalize the position that they already have.
Trump's lies about 2020 have not dissuaded Iowa Republicans from wanting to appear with him. That includes Iowans who are up for re-election next year. Both Grassley and Governor Kim Reynolds are slated to speak ahead of him tonight at the Iowa State Fairgrounds. For NPR News, I'm Clay Masters in Des Moines.
This is NPR News.
For years, StoryCorps has brought people together for conversations about the things that matter most. WABE and StoryCorps invite you to make an appointment to record a conversation with a loved one, either in person or in their virtual recording booth, and add your story to American history at the Library of Congress. Sign up now at storycorps.org/Atlanta or call 800-850-4406.
35 years ago, Janet Jackson's Control album was a turning point. For Janet herself,
She was committed to the work, to the choreography, to everything.
and also for the music industry.
He would literally jump on people's desks, like literally, and go, "You don't know what this is. This is a double feather record."
How Janet Jackson changed all of pop. Next time on It's Been a Minute from NPR.
Today at noon on 90.1 WABE.
I'm Windsor Johnston with these headlines. A U.S. delegation is meeting with senior Taliban representatives in Doha this weekend. It's the first round of high-level talks since the U.S. withdrew its troops from Afghanistan in August. Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell is warning once again that he will not help Democrats raise the nation's debt ceiling. Lawmakers this week reached an agreement on a short-term resolution that lifts the borrowing cap through early December. The measure now heads to the House. More than 130 countries have reached a tentative agreement to set a global minimum tax rate of 15%. The move is designed to deter multinational companies from putting their profits in countries where they pay little or no taxes. I'm Windsor Johnston, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from TIAA. When one helps others' futures, their own can take a back seat. TIAA is dedicated to helping people pursue the retirement they deserve. More at TIAA.org/neverrunout. And from C3AI. C3AI software enables organizations to use artificial intelligence at enterprise scale, solving previously unsolvable problems. C3AI. This is Enterprise AI.
I'm Susanna Capeluto, Deputy Managing Editor here at WABE, filling in for Alex Helmick. On this Weekend Review, we start with the election season, which is about to kick off in earnest next week when early voting starts. The Atlanta mayor's race with 14 candidates has been getting a lot of attention. The week started with the mayoral forum hosted by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution with the top 5 highest polling candidates. With crime dominating the discussion, the question, what would you do in your first 100 days as mayor to reduce gun violence? City Councilman Antonio Brown responded first.
Really adapting and mandating a community policing policy within the standard operating procedures of the Atlanta Police. I think this is incredibly important. I enacted one of the first community policing units off of MLK and Lowry. We were able to reduce crime of 57%.
City Council President Felicia Moore had this to say on the matter.
Getting more officers on the street immediately by incentivizing our retired officers, particularly those that recently have left the force, to come back on the contract for a year or two so that they can help getting the officers that are behind the desk to spend one shift out in the community.
Councilman Andre Dickens, Attorney Sharon Gay, and former Mayor Kasim Reed were also at the forum. There were many other forums this week with various candidates. One was on transportation that featured 3 of them. Emil Moffitt was there.
Along with affordable housing and public safety, transit continues to be among the most talked about issues of this mayor's race. Councilmember Antonio Brown says old ideas of how to move people around Atlanta just aren't working.
You need leadership that has a fresh perspective, that's not caught up in the politics in the city.
Fellow Councilman Andre Dickens says transportation is critical beyond just getting people to and from work.
It's about connecting people to where they need to get to for educational opportunities, for health opportunities.
Council President Felicia Moore says the mayor plays a major role in which projects get priority.
You use that influence that you have and that bully pulpit, and you scream loudly and you make sure you get the right people in place.
The 3 candidates at last night's forum were peppered with questions about the future of the Beltline. All 3 said adding light rail is a must. Again, Andre Dickens.
I am not satisfied with a large sidewalk that people enjoy walking on or cycling on, but I am very interested in making sure that this 22-mile loop has rail on it.
Felicia Moore says light rail would add more affordable options for getting around the city.
We want the Beltline to be that connective source, and we want everyone along the Beltline to be of a variety of income levels.
With an estimated price tag of $2.5 billion, Antonio Brown says Atlanta should take advantage of federal infrastructure dollars, finally put rail on the Beltline.
To ensure that we have the funds to sustain what is necessary and what this city should have already had in place.
The forum's organizers say the 2 other top polling candidates, Kasim Reed and Sharon Gay, were invited but chose not to take part. Emil Moffitt, WABE News.
This week also saw a mayoral forum on children and families. The discussion centered around expanding access to quality health care in the city. City Council President Felicia Moore said she'd consider offering child care for city employees.
I think we certainly have an opportunity to look at city space where we can work with another provider to provide child care that our city employees can have access to.
Candidate Sharon Gay said she'd try to expand childcare options for lower income residents.
How can public-private partnerships more effectively deliver a wider range of childcare services at a price that income-challenged families can afford?
This forum also included candidates Kenny Hill, Rebecca King, Roosevelt Sears, and City Council members Andre Dickens and Antonio Brown. Another big topic in the election is affordable housing, and yes, there was a forum for that as well. Stephanie Stokes reported that most candidates called for the city simply to act on its current policies.
The forum covered gentrification, homelessness, and zoning. Councilmember Andre Dickens said the city has a plan to follow from the public-private group House ATL.
The new thing is doing the old thing fully. Just do what we said we'd do.
That could include providing more property tax relief for vulnerable residents and hiring another chief housing officer. Former Mayor Kasim Reed pointed to work he started during his term.
If you want to know what someone will do, you look at what they have done.
He said under his watch, the city won a $30 million grant from HUD for West Side neighborhoods, and Atlanta still needs to put that money to use. Other candidates included Sharon Gay, Councilmember Antonio Brown, and Council President Felicia Moore. Stephanie Stokes, WABE News.
A recent poll from WXIA TV found that more than 30% of Atlanta voters are still undecided, and the mayor's race isn't the only one on the ballot. There's also the race for city council president and several council seats, as well as school board races. There are several other municipal elections across the state this November. This week, those who work on film and TV crews voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike if no agreement can be reached on better work hours and other demands. The strike could bring Georgia's flourishing film industry to a standstill. International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Workers Local 479 President Ray Brown talked this week with Jim Burris about what's at stake.
There's a perception, anyway, that anyone who works in film or TV has it made. Abundant pay for the work, plentiful breaks, even fed like royalty. What's reality like from your perspective?
Well, I think these perceptions are fed by the glamour that we see on television that we make. But the reality is that it's a grueling business. Very long days. We're all high-fiving each other if we do a 12-hour day, but it's more like 14, 15, 16. I've done 22 and 23-hour days. I've watched the sun come up and the sun go down many times, and it's a grind. It's a daily grind that we go through, and often well into the weekend. Our work days often end sometimes early Saturday mornings. We affectionately refer to them as Fratterdays. So it's not as glamorous as you think behind the scenes, Jim.
What kind of pay and work rules is the union seeking?
Well, there's always a cost of living pay involved, but that's really not where we came to loggerheads, Jim. I mean, the reality is we're asking for some basic quality of life issue things here. We would like our work day defined. We would like our turnarounds. That's from the time we leave set to the time we come back. We would like those extended so that we can get decent sleep and not drive home being sleep deprived. These are things they weren't even willing to address. Wouldn't even sit down at the table. That's what brought us to this point. These weren't things that we couldn't come to an agreement on. They simply weren't willing to address these basic quality of life issues.
How many folks make up Local 479?
We're hovering around 5,800 members right now.
And what was turnout locally for this vote?
Well, we had an unprecedented turnout of about 86% on return votes, and of those return votes, 99.2 voted yes. Now, a typical election at our hall or a vote on a constitutional change will draw maybe 20% of ballots sent out will be returned. And in this case, to have an 86%, almost 90% participation in those eligible to vote is unprecedented. It's absolutely unprecedented, and we could not be happier with the numbers.
And those numbers play out nationwide, as I understand as well. If the vote or if the strike happens, what does it look like for Atlanta and the folks here who hold these jobs?
Well, all these negotiations right now are addressing two agreements. One is the Hollywood Basic Agreement, and one is the Area Standards Agreement. The 13 Hollywood locals, or California locals, fall under the Hollywood Basic, and throughout the rest of the country and the nation, there are studio mechanics locals, which Local 479, my local, is one of them. And our biggest agreement, we have several, but our biggest one is the Area Standards Agreement. If we strike that agreement, it will affect a great many of shows, not all of them here in town. There are a couple of agreements that will still exist. The basic cable agreement will still exist. So some Stars and HBO shows may be continued to shoot. But I'm going to say that it's going to take a 80% hit on everything in town shooting right now, in and around Georgia and Alabama.
Wow. Of the entire workforce who make their livings locally in the industry, how many would you say as a percentage are union members? And what happens to non-union members during a strike?
Well, that's tough for me to call, because I really don't have a pulse on the non-union workforce. I mean, we are a big local. We're the largest studio mechanics local in the IA. And there's 23 of those locals. We're the largest one in the IATSE with almost 6,000 members. I don't really have a finger on that pulse. Quite frankly, we bring members in to our union and train them in our union, and we always invite our non-union brothers and sisters and kin to come and check us out and see what we're all about. We love our non-union folks out there, and we're constantly trying to bring them into our world to get them the correct pay and the correct benefits and all the things that they do not get or otherwise suffer in the non-union world.
Ray Brown is longtime president of IATSE Local 479. Ray, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us this afternoon. We appreciate it.
Jim, my pleasure. I send my blessings. Thank you.
Take care.
Stay State senators held hearings this week on how to improve food security in Georgia. They heard from experts from around the country. As Christopher Alston reported, the series of hearings was led by Senator Harold Jones of Augusta.
According to Jones, more than 2 million Georgians live in parts of the state that lack access to fresh produce and affordable food. Lawmakers are considering a variety of solutions to address these food deserts, from nutrition education to urban farming. DeKalb County Commissioner Lorraine Cochran-Johnson spoke about the negative impacts of small box retailers found disproportionately in low-income neighborhoods.
Also, as it relates to products, it is debatable in terms of what is offered at dollar stores and or our box stores. What you find is there has been a traditional absence of healthy food items.
A spokesperson for the U.S. Department of Agriculture told the committee Georgia has the 5th highest population living in areas without access to healthy food. The panel is expected to give its recommendations to the Senate later this year. Christopher Alston, WABE News.
Georgia Attorney General Chris Carr was a guest on Political Breakfast this week. Carr talked with Lisa Ram, Theron Johnson, and Brian Robinson about what he feels he can do to unify the Georgia Republican Party.
I can only control myself. I know every other candidate can only control themselves. And I've said it before. I said, look, I will stand up. I will fight to unify the party. I will talk about the things that we've done as Attorney General, what we believe in. And I think, again, this state has had 2 decades of incredible growth under conservative Republican leadership. And I'm very proud to be a part of that for the past 5 years. I'm proud of the role I play as Attorney General, which is to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the constitutional laws of the state of Georgia and represent the interests of the people of our state. But as Johnny Isaacson used to say, look, politics is the ultimate team sport. And, you got to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge it as a party. And I'm going to be a part of doing just that.
Well, Mr. Attorney General, this is Theron. Thank you so much for being on with us today. And last time we saw each other, we was having dinner at an undisclosed restaurant in the city of Atlanta, in Buckhead, actually. We made it out there safely, bro. So it was good. But hey, so I have a lot of questions to ask, but just to piggyback on something you said, Attorney General Carr, tell our listeners, when you have actually stood up to President Trump. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't want to paraphrase, but I know there's been some times that I'm sure you are proud of where you've actually pushed back on former President Trump and something that he may influence you or try to influence you to do, and you stood up for what you thought was right.
Having worked for a United States Senator, having been a part of this party, we had an interesting and challenging time in our state between November the 3rd and January the 6th. And we went to court 16 times based on the facts and the evidence to stand up for, as I said before, the Constitution of the United States, the constitutional laws of the state of Georgia. My job is to look at the facts and the evidence, and that's what we did. And we went to court before federal judges and state court judges, between Obama appointees and Trump appointees and everybody in between, and we did what our job was to do, which is to defend the law of our state. And of those 16 times, we prevailed 16 times. But again, do I want my team to win, the Republicans? Absolutely. And I'm going to do everything I can in 22. Because in my opinion, as Brian mentioned before, as you've mentioned, the state has narrowed. Isaacson got elected with 59% of the vote, no 4. And I got about 1.4% of the vote in 18. So the state's narrowed. Too much to lose in 22 if we don't, get back together and rally the troops.
With that said, President Trump continues to be a distraction. Some people call him a distraction, let me say that. What's your pleasure at this point? That he just stay out of Georgia politics?
I'm just going to focus on what I'm doing. Plain and simple, that's all I can control. Now, do I think that we can do some things to really, put some points on the board, what we've done on human trafficking and violent crime and gang activity and elder abuse? Absolutely, because I think those issues really do appeal to a group that was critically important in 2020, and that's college-educated men and women in the suburbs, not just of Atlanta, but around the country. And I think that's where Republicans really had a hard time.
Oh, Theron loves talk about those college-educated women in the Atlanta suburbs, but that's, hardly a week goes by.
Yeah, those are my ladies. I like them. They both the right way.
And finally, it may be time to get your flu shot. The head of Atlanta Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says the coming flu season could be rough. Dr. Rochelle Walensky says The lack of flu infections since early last year could make Americans vulnerable to the virus in the coming months. And that's it for WABE's Week in Review. I'm Susanna Capelouto. You can always find more stories from my award-winning colleagues at WABE.org.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Staples, with supplies to get business done no matter where it gets done, from ink and toner cartridges to technology like webcams and networking accessories. More at Staples stores or staples.com. Staples. And from Data IQ, an AI and machine learning platform designed to give everyone in the enterprise the ability to work with and understand data for better decision making. Learn more at dataiq.com.
You're listening to 90.1 WABE, where ATL meets NPR. I'm Shelley Canavy. Coming up next, it's been a minute. It's 12 o'clock.
Support for WABE comes from Pinnacle Home Improvements, a home exterior remodeling company serving Atlanta since 1988. Pinnacle Home Improvements offers roof installations, replacement windows, and a variety of siding options. More at pinnaclehomeimprovements.com.
The Fall Member Drive is just around the corner, and when you give early today, you'll be entered into a special drawing. It's for a $1,000 certificate to Oriental Designer Rugs to be used toward the purchase of an area rug. This drawing is only for today. Visit WABE.org/contest rules for more. Your gift helps WABE tell great stories and amplify the voices of Atlanta. Please make your gift now at WABE.org/donate. Thank you.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. This week, Janet Jackson. Her breakthrough album, Control, turns 35 this year. Two of our producers told me that we are still feeling the impact of Control and several Janet albums that followed.
I think those albums ended up changing the way that music sounded because it changed the way that radio sounded. And so I think the influence later on with not only the album, but the visuals that went with the albums affected the way pop music became.
But all of that was overshadowed by a Super Bowl halftime show gone wrong in 2004.
It was as if that piece of fabric that was ripped from her clothing was replaced with some big scarlet letter. It was just as if the world said, we're done with you now because of this.
Re-examining Janet's legacy in pop culture. After these headlines.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. Most abortions are once again illegal in Texas after a federal court last night said an abortion law called SB 8 could go back into effect. NPR's Sarah McCammon reports the law has been at the center of legal battles for weeks.
The Biden administration is challenging SB 8, which prohibits abortions in Texas after about 6 weeks of pregnancy. A federal judge issued an order blocking the ban on Wednesday night. Now, a 3-judge panel of the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals has allowed the abortion ban to go back into effect. The U.S. Supreme Court allowed the law to first take effect on September 1st without weighing in on the constitutionality of it. That shut down most abortions in Texas, prompting many patients to travel to neighboring states for the procedure. Sarah McCammon, NPR News.
Former President Donald Trump is hitting the road with a rally in Iowa this weekend. NPR's Danielle Kurtzleben reports the move could be setting the groundwork for another run for the presidency in 2024.
Trump is speaking tonight at the Iowa State Fairgrounds in Des Moines. Several Iowa Republican politicians will also appear, including Senator Chuck Grassley and Governor Kim Reynolds. With well over 2 years to go until the 2024 Iowa caucuses, national polling shows that Republicans have further warmed to Trump in his absence from the White House. 2/3 of Republicans and Republican leaners say he should remain a major national political figure. That's up 10 points from earlier this year, according to a new poll from the Pew Research Center. And a plurality of Republicans, 44%, said they think he should run for president in 2024. The poll also showed that Democrats overwhelmingly do not want Trump to remain a major political figure. Danielle Kurtzleben, NPR News.
Consumers in the United Kingdom continue to feel the effects of a range of shortages caused by a supply chain crisis. Vicki Barker reports Britain's largest retailers have warned that stock levels are at their lowest in decades.
Brexit, the pandemic, and a post-pandemic surge in gas prices together mean more and more goods are struggling to get to market. New government statistics show nearly 9 million Britons, 1 in 6 adults, have been unable to obtain at least one staple food item in the past 2 weeks. 1 in 4 has been unable to obtain an essential non-food item.
Vicki Barker reporting. Facebook is once again apologizing for another widespread outage. The social media giant says a faulty configuration change caused its platforms, including Instagram and Messenger, to be down for about 2 hours on Friday. The company blamed a similar issue for another outage this week that forced its sites offline for nearly 6 hours. This is NPR News. The investigation into a massive oil spill off the coast of Southern California continues. The U.S. Coast Guard says an underwater pipeline may have been struck by a cargo ship's anchor. Officials say the breach could have happened a few months to a year ago. The crack in the pipeline spilled tens of thousands of gallons of crude oil off the coast of Huntington Beach last weekend. Iran's first president following the 1979 Islamic Revolution has died. NPR's Peter Kenyon reports Abdul Hassan Bani Sadr fled Iran after being impeached in 1981 and helped establish a group opposed to Iran's clerical establishment.
Bani Sadr was an Islamic nationalist who joined Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini in his exile in Paris and returned with the future supreme leader to Iran in 1979. As president, Bani Sadr struggled with leading clerics, including future Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In 1981, Iran's parliament impeached him. After fleeing to Paris, Bani Sadr helped found the National Council of Resistance, whose goal was the overthrow of the clerical regime in Tehran. But he left the group a few years later after disputes with other leading members. Bani Sadr's family said he died at a hospital in Paris following a long illness. He was 88. Peter Kenyon, NPR News, Istanbul.
Chinese President Xi Jinping is pledging to pursue reunification with Taiwan through peaceful rather than military means. In a speech in Beijing today, Xi called for peace between the two nations. His remarks come amid rising military tensions in the Taiwan Strait. This is NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Jarl and Pamela Moan. Thanking the people who make public radio great every day, and also those who listen. And the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
Millions of college sophomores stepped onto campus for the first time this year because last year was virtual. So many feel like freshmen.
You know, it's really not about what you missed, and it's about what you gain.
How colleges help students adjust on the next Morning Edition from NPR News. Waking Up Atlanta from 5 to 10 on 90.1 WABE.
Hey y'all, this is Sam's Aunt Betty. This week, the legacy of Janet Jackson. All right, let's start the show.
What is your first Janet Jackson memory?
It's a wild thing to ask me my first Janet Jackson memory because Janet and I are like the same age.
Oh, wow. This is music journalist Danielle Smith.
You know, it's a wonderful memory. So for my 8th birthday, my mother got me tickets to see the Jackson 5 live in concert at the Circle Star Theater in San Carlos, California. And when we got to the Circle Star Theater, there was an opening act. And that opening act was Randy Jackson and Janet Jackson.
Here's Janet and Randy, or Randy and Janet.
Wow. And she's at this point around your age, which is around 8?
Yeah, she was like 7 or 8. Yeah,
oh,
absolutely.
My goodness. How was she in that opening act performance?
Oh, well, the thing is, they weren't even singing. They were like doing skits.
Okay, Janet, now that you're up here, what do you want to do?
Like vaudeville. Like they were doing, they had jokes.
You can't do that. Everybody works in this family.
And one of the jokes was, and Janet is kind of known for this. You can find the shots of her dressed up kind of like Mae West and doing Mae West impressions.
That's the one, because she has those 2 little buns on her head and the feather boa, and she's swinging those hips and sassing everybody at like 8, 9, or 10 years old.
Yes, and so picture me in the audience screaming and yelling like a fool. Because my thought was, you have to understand, there was no social media. There weren't that many like fan magazines or black magazines for me to know that there even was a little sister to the Jackson 5. So I was screaming and hollering. I was so happy to know about her.
You're listening to It's Been a Minute from NPR. I'm Sam Sanders. In this episode, Janet, Miss Jackson. It is hard to describe how much Janet Jackson means to me. I can recall the exact place I was the first time I saw several of her music videos. I remember trying to teach myself the choreography from her Pleasure Principle video and almost being seriously injured in the process. I remember thinking that I would never hear a better song in my entire life than Love Will Never Do Without You. I was right. And you know, when it comes to the Janet fandom, I am not alone. Janet Jackson means a lot to a lot of people. So much of what she did in the 80s and the 90s and beyond, it laid the groundwork for so much that we see and hear now. Britney and Beyonce and even Taylor Swift.